Luke Strange, how are you?
Doing great. Doing great. How are you?
I am fantastic. Thank you so much for joining me here on the Checka Pro radio show. As you know, questions come in about home improvement. And when there's an electrical question, I go to my main man, Cool Hand Luke. That's what I like to call him. Love the name of your company. And so one of our listeners has asked a question. What's the difference between a fuse and a circuit breaker? They still use fuses?
Not too much in houses, but that's a good question. I mean, we still call them fuse boxes a lot of times, but most of them in houses now are circuit breakers. But the fuse, they look like kind of like we call them Edison fuses because they would kind of screw into for a house. It's for AC voltage. Now you'll see them in cars all the time for DC voltage. They're used all the time. But if it's, and then sometimes you'll see fuses in like air conditioning units, things of that nature. But a fuse has a metal, kind of like a thermostat would be like this. And then once it goes over that amperage is heat. So once the temperature of that metal changes, it'll break and it's done. So that's what houses were wired with. They would have those little screw in ones, and you'd have a 15 amp. That one would pop because you got too many Christmas lights or what have you. And then you just screw in a 20 amp. That one would pop. Then you just put a 30 amp. Well, people were just unscrewing and putting, is whatever size they would want. And, that became a big safety issue because then you have hot wires throughout the house. So, those have, no one puts those in houses anymore. But the cool thing about circuit breaker is, it has the metals inside of it that can read the temperature of the wire and the amperage that's going across essentially, and it will kick off, but it can also be reset. So it's not a one and done. You can get a few, resets out of there before, depending on the quality of the circuit breaker, it can be reset, once it cools down. So that's the benefit. They're longer lasting. They're way more accurate than the fuse. I mean, well, the fuses were accurate. It's just, it was unsafe because you pop it and then you have to go screw in another one, and you're touching very close to touching, very close to electricity on that one. If it's unscrewed, you could touch, stick your finger in there and get shocked. So there was multiple, issues with that. I mean, it worked in the 20s and 30s, but we've changed a bit since then.
You're making me sound old, Luke, because I wasn't around in the 20s and 30s, but when I was a kid, there were some homes I lived in that had the old glass fuse. And you're right. They're like kind of like a big bottle top, like deep. Okay. So if you unscrewed it, now you had access to all that voltage right there. I mean, if you stuck your finger in there, and I can't imagine those would be even legal today with code. The new breaker boxes, the panels are quite safe, for the homeowner to open the door and be able to turn back on, or if need be, turn off that breaker. Does a breaker have a life cycle? Can it be tripped and go back and tripped and go back so many times?
Yeah, they have a life cycle. I mean, it's still springs and oils inside of there. It's a mechanical thing. So, in Texas, a lot of them are put in the garage. The sun's baking down on the opposite side of that breaker panel. So the heat's going to make a big difference. If the circuit breakers are used for a long time, we'll see them on big appliances like the air conditioning, dryers. Those breakers are worked a lot harder. So they might not get the full, 20 years, but the manufacturers of them don't warranty them that long. They're built, for 20, 25 years is what I've seen in Texas. You're accurate. But I've seen them go out, if they're used a bunch, they're going to go out sooner. It's just that amperage pulls a lot of heat through there. So, it doesn't last forever, but, it's way better than the fuses, like I said. Yeah. But yeah, it's safe too. You're correct. Whenever you have the door open to reset it. Now, something that a lot of people forget about is on those ones, you got to go all the way off most of the time, turn it all the way off on that circuit breaker. and then back on.
Mm.
And then what I do too is I turn it all the way off, and then you want to let it cool a little bit. Because if they're just trying to push it back on, then it may still be hot. If it is though, if it's hot to the touch, there's other issues that need to be investigated on that. I want to just reset it if it is too hot.
The moral of the story, everybody, is if your breaker's acting funny and it won't stay where it's supposed to stay and it's hot and it keeps tripping, you need to call Luke at Cool Hand Electric. All of his information is located in the description of this podcast. Thank you so much, Luke. Appreciate you coming on the program.
Appreciate you having me.